Hello, everybody. Good evening. Shabbat Shalom. We'll be doing Havdalah a little bit later, so we'll hold on to Shabbat a little bit longer as we usher in this night of Slichot, which begins in many ways. It's one of the beginnings of our High Holy Days season. And for many of us, we've been thinking about it since the first of Elul, the first of this Hebrew month that precedes High Holidays. But for others, this might be one of those moments of awakening. And we chose for this night to focus on a book that will help us think about not just tonight, but this entire year that is to come. And before I get into that and introduce our guest speaker, I just want to mention that we have disabled chat, I believe. I think, Shai, we can put the chat back on, actually. But we did also put on auto captioning. And if you don't want that on your screen, at the bottom of your screen, there's something that says hide captions, and that way you don't have to look at that. So I want to welcome Abigail Pogrebin, who is our guest. We have her book. Many of us have been reading it. Others have the opportunity to read it, and we encourage you to do so. And I want to mention, and I'll just say to you, Abigail, that I first heard you in person as you interviewed Sarah Hurwitz at the 2019 Reform Movement Biennial. And we chose Sarah's book as our community book read last year, Here All Along. And this year, because I was so taken by your insights in that interview, we chose your book, My Jewish Year. Hold it up as well. 18 Holidays, One Wandering Jew, which was a finalist for the 2018 National Jewish Book Award, and which I had the pleasure of reading as you were writing it in the foreword. And you are also, I just want to share with others just a little bit more about background, an author of a book called Stars of David, Prominent Jews Talking About Being Jewish, where you interviewed 62 people, everyone from Ruth Bader Ginsburg to Steven Spielberg, about religious Jewish identity. And your book, One and the Same, was about growing up as a twin, which you are an identical twin with your sibling. And you have this fun best-selling Kindle Singles Showstopper, which chronicled your teenage adventures on Broadway in a rare Sondheim flop. I'm sure you could share more insights about that one. And your background as a journalist, Emmy-nominated producer for Mike Wallace at 60 Minutes, and then produced for Bill Moyers on PBS. And one of the things which I want to delve into as well, since writing this book, you have served as president of Central Synagogue in New York City from 2015 to 18. And you've been the director of Jewish outreach for Michael Bloomberg's 2020 presidential campaign, which is a little bit of the political side. And right now we are welcoming you from, well, I wasn't sure I was going to say, now I'm going to just say from Italy, which I am so pleased that you're willing at 2:45 a.m. or now 3 a.m. to be joining us in a real slichot kind of feeling moments to be here. So very much welcome to St. Paul, Minnesota, virtually.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. It's great to be here. I've heard so much about you through my rabbi, and it's so nice to see you all. And no worries about the fact that it's 3 a.m. because I haven't adjusted to Italy time. I didn't expect to be here, but my husband invited me along for a business trip. And I thought, as you know, it's very in keeping with Slichot, as you know, because you're supposed to really do it late at night is kind of our spiritual preparation for atonement. So this is the beginning of my atonement, is to be with the wonderful St. Paul community.
Absolutely. I hope that feeling continues. I will never forget actually being in Jerusalem, where we would do it very much in the wee hours of the morning in a Sephardic tradition, where they would pass around the snuff box to help you sort of stay awake.
Stay awake, exactly. I'm using gelato. I'm using gelato instead of snuff box to stay awake.
Much better.
But it's good to meet you.
And I want to start, I'm going to ask a few questions. You and I will have a conversation, and I want to invite everyone to think about any questions you might have. And we'll just invite anyone at the end of my questions to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your questions as well. We'll just make this very informal, conversational. So I want to start by saying just the obvious. You are recounting a year, the Jewish year, with all of your successes, but also your stumblings in a very honest way. And you wrote that you realized that your method might appear quirky or even hypocritical to some. And this is your language. I would be observing Jewish holidays without being observant, eating ritual foods without keeping kosher, designing a personal seminary without getting a degree. It would be an expedition, not a conversion. And I was clear, but others might not be. So any one of those reasons might stop many from trying, especially the appearing hypocritical. How did you pick and choose observances while feeling authentic, or did it feel inauthentic? How, even maybe looking back, would you express what that year was like?
Well, it's a great question. And first, I would say the year was both demanding and magical. And demanding in the sense that we all know that Judaism is a heavy lift. If you are going to take on essentially every observance ritual kind of requirement, and I don't say this, to play the violins, it's a tradition that is not untaxing. And I think that's part of the power of it. I was someone who had, I think what many Jews have, of kind of the top maybe 5 holidays in my childhood and my routine. So we definitely went to high holiday services, both Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and we celebrated Hanukkah, and we had 2 Seders, and I actually had a third because some may know that my mother was a co-founder, creator of the Feminist Seder, which was radical for its time in the 70s. We can touch on that because I touch on it in the book. But I went to my Aunt Betty's for the first service, which was very traditional, and my Uncle Danny's for the second. And then once I was 12, there was this Feminist Seder. And I'm trying to think of what I'm missing, but there wasn't much else. We really weren't otherwise kind of, we were proud Jews. We absolutely lit candles. So Shabbat, as we will talk about, I'm sure, is the most important holiday. But I was not a Jew who grew up with the entire calendar in the vernacular of my Jewish identity. And I wasn't missing it until I began to go deeper into Jewish learning and just feel like this was a gap. It was a gap, first of all, in that I'm one of those Jews who doesn't like to not understand things. And granted, Jewish tradition and text is a deep dive that you never kind of climb out of, because that's part of its richness, is that it's never done. But it was beginning to bother me that I didn't understand kind of the connectors. Why, after we've been in synagogue for, I don't have to tell you how many hours on Yom Kippur, pounding our chests and kind of opening ourselves up in introspection, do we go right into Sukkot? How are those holidays connected at all, or are they non sequiturs, essentially? I wanted to understand the difference between Shemini Atzeret and Shavuot. I was one of those Jews that couldn't have explained it before. I wanted to sort of fill in the blanks. And my way of doing it was to basically kind of pick a place to go observe it, prepare as much as I could. And believe me, I ran out of both holidays and time because there were so many rabbis and teachers I didn't even get to. But to really say, where am I going to absorb Sukkot this year? How am I going to prepare for it? What am I going to read? What am I going to understand? What I think many Jews would be shocked to learn is that not every holiday is, as we say, Sinai, like came from Sinai. Some of these holidays were developed later in our tradition, relatively later, in considering all the thousands of years. And then, of course, there's the modern holidays, which I had never observed before, which are much more Israel connected. Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut, Independence Day and Remembrance Day. Yom HaShoah, obviously remembering the Holocaust, also a modern holiday, and to try to understand what would it be like if I took these holidays seriously and did my homework and then kind of opened myself to experience them. And I'll take one breath, and you can see as a New Yorker, I don't take a lot of breaths. One of the things my editor at the forward, and you were kind enough to read them when they were in article form, it's much more expanded and I hope even a little more interesting in the book form. But when I was writing it as articles in real time, meaning I was both studying for the holiday, observing the holiday, and then going home and kind of digesting and writing about the holiday in the course of 1 year, my editor, Jane Eisner, she's editor-in-chief, she was then, of the forward, said, my one requirement, Abby, is that you be truthful. I want to know when you're bored. I want to know when you're stuck. I want to know when you're confused. I want to know when you're moved. I am not a rabbi. I have incredible humility about that. I don't have your ordination. I don't have your training. I am sort of the every Jew and the journalist, frankly, entering this calendar because I know it is the scaffolding in so many ways of our Jewish identity, our Jewish life. and asking some of the fundamental questions. Why do these holidays speak to us today? Not just what are they there for, but what are we, in a sense, supposed to, how are they the machinery for connection? How are they kind of the technology for deepening our lives and figuring out what we're supposed to kind of show up and do in the world?
I'm really glad that, I mean, if you credit Jane Eisner for helping you be honest, I think that is one of the gifts, real gifts. And actually, I want to quote one other part as a way of focusing on that,
Thank
which
you.
is starting at the beginning of the year, which is right now. Elul, you were actually taking a shofar and learning how to sound the shofar. And you have this wonderful phrase that it was both poignant and pointless. And I loved that at the same time. And you were connected to something ancient, which was the poignant part, but you felt a bit foolish doing it. So again, back to this authenticity piece. How do we overcome as liberal Jews the feeling of authenticity that we need to make ritual observances real?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and thank you for your preparation, because I even forgot that line. It's been a while since I wrote it. I think what I was constantly wrestling with, and I hope there are some on this call that relate, there are things that sometimes feel self-conscious to do. There are ways where a barrier for a layperson is, in a way, almost, am I entitled to this ritual? Am I equipped enough, expert enough to take this on? And certainly I learned that Elul, which, let's back up and say that I was one of those people that did not know. I thought the new year was kind of the beginning. Rosh Hashanah was the kickoff. That was the starting gun. But it was so meaningful and challenging to learn that we're actually supposed to front load atonement by 40 days. Essentially, Elul is the month of kind of training before the marathon, or it's how you train for a marathon, that we begin to dig into ourselves, that we begin to unpack our character, our year, our missteps in as candid a way as we're brave enough to face them. And we can talk about the ritual I chose with which to observe this Elul month that we're in right now when I was writing the book. But it was really eye-opening to me that in August, when people are kind of still, putting on sunscreen and having barbecues, that we're really supposed to start doing that hard work of looking at ourselves. One of the other things you're supposed to do, which I love the idea that the shofar is a wake-up call. Maimonides says it's kind of an alarm clock, and it's a spiritual alarm clock. As I know, we're supposed to essentially kind of grab ourselves by the lapels and say, take a look at yourself really honestly right now. Don't shy away from the mistakes, the people to whom you owe an apology. It's harder than we think, and it's sometimes not easy, but less challenging to stand in a synagogue and pound our chests and recite the liturgy. It's harder to think about the person that we have to sit in front of and look face to face, and you are supposed to do it in person if you're brave enough, and really apologize, and apologize not generally. It's not the if I did anything to offend you kind of apology. It's, that time that I said this, or I forgot that, or I hurt you in these ways. It's to be very specific. So the shofar is a long way of getting back to, I wanted to hear it every day. You're supposed to hear it every day. And so I got one on Amazon, not the real kind of shofar, which is the ram's horn, which frankly has kind of not a great odor for some who've actually experienced a real one. I got the plastic kind, and it comes with a instruction booklet. I don't have to tell anyone on this call how hard it is to blow a shofar successfully. It's actually one of the toughest things. And the instruction booklet said that you should actually practice by filling your mouth with water and standing over the sink and spitting with control. So you can imagine my then teenage kids watching their Michigan mothers spitting, over the kitchen sink. And my son, Benjamin, at the time, he said, let me just try that. And he picked up the shofar and boom, there was that sound. I heard Rosh Hashanah in the kitchen. And I said, you can be my shofar blower, because I'm supposed to hear this every day at dawn. Of course, forgetting that my, I think 16-year-old son was not getting up before noon at that time during the summer. So I had to blow it myself. And it was kind of a pathetic little bleat that I eked out. But I will say, even with all the humor of how difficult it is, I think everyone on this call knows what that sound feels like. It connects you to your childhood. It connects you to the ancestors who have come before. And in a way, it's what I love that you've highlighted. It's the doing that leads to the feeling. It's not necessarily that you understand every reason why we blow a shofar, and there's all these other reasons why it is a ram's horn that we can talk about. But just the fact that we do it and we hear it, it sets something in motion. And I think marking atonement or the run up to atonement this way, extremely powerful.
I'm really glad a lot of those messages that you're lifting up, and I want to just highlight one, which is just, again, just in general, the idea of trying things on, which is what this whole year was about for you, which the Reform movement rejected in its origin in 1885 in our Pittsburgh platform, the idea of all these ritual observances, the mitzvot. But as we're trying them on, before we reject them, before we're trying it, I think we have to try it for a while. And so like blowing shofar for a full month is a while. I remember putting on a talit for the first time. It took me 2 years for that to feel authentic, 2 years. So it's not that these things are going to happen. And I am very taken by Rosenzweig, the philosopher, who says, not yet. So we free ourselves from the worry of whether it works or doesn't work, and just try it. And it might not work. And it's totally fine if it doesn't, but we have to figure out some way to get there. I want to now just extrapolate even 10,000 feet for a second to the top, and just why the calendar? Because there's so many ways of entering Judaism. I mean, when you were interviewing these people about their Jewishness, and I'm going to come back to that a little bit later, but you know, it could be through learning about the services. It could be about studying Talmud. It could be about Jewish food, but you chose the Jewish year. So why that?
I feel like the more I learned about Jewish learning, the more I experienced it. I saw the holidays as a kind of architecture of Jewish life. And for those who were living by that architecture, there was a framework that in a way called for a certain kind of spiritual excavation and more kind of spiritual attentiveness. It doesn't mean like you're going through your day with so much meaning. We all have so much that's mundane. But I think what our tradition does is actually not let us ever kind of get complacent. And as you know, whether you are blessing the food you eat or pausing every week on Shabbat. I mean, Shabbat is such a huge idea. And I think I didn't grow up with Shabbat observance in the sense of, you know, really dialing down or not answering a phone or not doing any work. But even just the work of not working is, I think, profound to incorporate in a life. I will say that I failed at it. I'm very honest about how I think the first line in my Shabbat chapter is I'm failing at Shabbat. But I think when you even look at what we're about to enter, you know, there's 15 holidays coming up almost. I mean, that's a Jewish exaggeration, but you know what I'm saying? It's like, it is a marathon that's starting now. And I wanted to understand, if I took on that architecture, kind of what would happen? Like, what would I feel? What would I learn? What would I understand differently? And frankly, I did look at those who are observant. It wasn't that I was making a choice to be Orthodox, but those who, modern Orthodox or Orthodox, where this is a given that they're going to fast on Tzom Gedalia. I mean, not a lot of people know about the fast of Gedalia, and don't test me on who it was. I know only like a one sentence of what I remember, but it is a powerful thing to have to fast before you fast. I mean, there was a fast before the fast, and the way that it takes you, it is, in a sense, it is a ride that is both required and also kind of surprising. And it's surprising every year. I mean, I'm sure you know, because you've read Breshit, you know, Genesis, year after year after year in this job, and it's never the same. And similarly, Hanukkah for me in doing this book, it just wasn't the same as a Hanukkah the year before or a Hanukkah when I was 10 years old. And it won't be the same as a Hanukkah this year, even if I'm singing the same things and even if I'm doing the same rituals. I think that's what our tradition opens up to, and I wanted to understand it.
I've heard Rabbi Arthur Green, one of the 51 people that you talked to in this whole year, speak about God as if God is saying on the high holidays to all the people who come, if you care about my year, I'll care about your year, which is a way of saying that if you care about my year, meaning all the holidays and all the rituals and all these things that actually move you, I'll care about your year, meaning your life cycle events and your, you know, your brisses and your bar mitzvahs and et cetera. And it's a very thoughtful way of saying a truth, which is many Jews are thinking about their life cycles, but not about the calendar year. So I think the calendar year is a great way in. It's one of the ways we're using your book to lift that up, and hopefully people will follow. And I just want to take up, you were speaking about Shabbat, and you devoted 3 chapters to Shabbat because it is the most important. That which is more frequent in Judaism is more important. And so Shabbat is really important. And it's a chance to reflect on our beautiful and broken world. And you had 2 chapters to focus on the beautiful part, one on the beautiful, one on the broken, meaning the creation part. It's a beautiful world, we get to rest. One on the broken part, meaning our restlessness because it's not yet fixed. And the Exodus calls us to action. And it's been 8 years since you went through this year, I think, if I'm right. Anything that you can say about, up to you, whether I'm not Jane Eisner, but in terms of being honest about your Shabbat observance and how it resonates to you to this day.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I really thank you, Rabbi, because I love what you framed in terms of the kind of the appreciation and also the brokenness and what it requires of us. And just to explain to those who don't know, I first write about just trying to understand Shabbat and what it asks of us and why it's difficult, at least for somebody who's used to being on their phone. Although obviously when I was growing up as a kid, there were no phones. I think that would have been an easier time for me to take Shabbat on. But then the second chapter is I really focus on, so I'm spending Shabbat with a group of young people from Avodah, which is the Jewish Service Corps. Some of you may know, students who are in their first year after graduating college, who commit a year to doing service. And usually it's connected to fighting poverty. They work in an organization for a year, but they live in a house with others who are committed also to Jewish life, and it's pluralistic. So they have to figure out how kosher the house is and what rituals they do together. And it was just very powerful to be with folks in their 20s who are essentially taking on this mantle and figuring out sort of a Jewish way on their own. And then the last Shabbat chapter is kind of coming back. My book editor at that point said, I need to know where you landed. What is your Shabbat at Central Synagogue where I belong? And so that's the final Shabbat chapter. But you're so right that it is, to me, in a way, if there was a neon light or a neon sign, it should be on the Sabbath, because it in so many ways epitomizes everything that Judaism stands for. Not just the idea that we should not just go, and pause, but that we should also make sure other people are not working on our behalf. So it's not just that we stop working, but it's that everyone stops working. That is just such a powerful idea. And now I'm forgetting your question. Oh, and what my Shabbat now? This is why I'm ducking it and why I'm in Jewish therapy. I don't want to delve in. My Shabbat now is very changed by the pandemic. I was, as a member of Central Synagogue, I was there pretty much weekly. When I was president, I had to sit on the bima, which had both huge privileges, and also it meant that you had to kind of have a nice outfit and be careful to cross your legs on the bima every week because people were looking at you. So that was a less private kind of personal experience for those 3 years as president. But once I was off the bima, I was, I think, 2 years out when the pandemic hit. And Central Synagogue was already equipped to be live streamed because we had been doing it for years for those who wanted to have a service wherever they were in the world, not just in America. So there are hundreds, sometimes thousands, who are live stream, and I became one of them. And everything was a virtual service, as I'm sure yours were too. And so I've slowly inching back to being in person. I look forward to it on these holidays. I went last year masked to synagogue. But I would say that my Shabbat, what has stayed with me is a sense that this should be different. This should be a different day. It shouldn't just be in the rush and flow of a Tuesday, that when the sun begins to set on Friday, I should be noting that it's that separation between in a way, the mundane and the holy, and to try, I can't in a sense make my own holy space, but I try to be sort of mindful that this is a different 24 hours.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit here. In this book, you describe going to the mikveh And as it turns out, my wife, Cantor Spilker, is starting a liberal mikveh here in the Twin Cities after her experiences being at Mayim Chaim in Boston, and now is really far along in that process and trying to help people see why this is something that liberal Jews can find meaningful to them in an egalitarian way. So anything, you describe it in your book on page 56, but I'm not asking you to recount that exactly.
Yeah.
Anything you want to share?
Yeah. No, I really had never experienced a mikvah. And I was actually talking to Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, who was one of my teachers for the book. And I know you know who he is. He's sort of a teacher of teachers. I think he's, very late 80s now, lives in Israel. And he had really urged me to do kind of not just a refreshment of the soul and the mind, but of the body when Yom Kippur was approaching. And he said that some people choose to go to a mikveh and have these blessings said and immerse. And so first I did the research to learn about the Boston mikveh, which obviously was really a game changer in terms of kind of changing the frame around mikveh, which many in the feminist movement felt before was a kind of it was all about ideas that were uncomfortable, like as if women are impure and have to be purified, and instead kind of reclaiming it as a reset, as refreshment, really using liturgy and immersion, as I'm sure your wife really understands, to kind of see it as something that we are choosing and not something that has to be done because in some way we're unclean. And so I went with I asked my daughter, and I have a twin sister and she has a daughter the same age. I asked the girls to come with me, and you're obviously separate, all three of us, but it was an extremely powerful experience and surprisingly so, because I kind of went in with a little bit of skepticism. I thought it would be a little crunchy. It was very profound in its simplicity, and particularly in the idea that you're kind of stripping everything physically down, which I see Yom Kippur very much in my learning as that is a kind of, we are naked, right? We are opening ourselves up. And in terms of the accounting of the soul, Heshbon HaNefesh, which we're supposed to be doing now, there was almost like a physicalizing of that kind of nakedness that I thought was something very, very profound.
Wonderful. I want to speak to you now as a fellow parent and also a fellow empty nester. You wrote this book while in your 40s, and from everything I could tell, this was for yourself, not for your kids. And now with Ben and Molly being out of the house, in some ways it could be easier because your time is yours, but in some level it could be harder because it's not with others in the same kind of way, doing holidays and observances. Anything that you could speak to about that?
Well, first of all, it's harder because I'm a verklempt Jewish mother that misses my children. And I'm so glad that they're independent and that they are, living their lives. But it is, both freeing and incredibly sad to have them no longer underfoot, so to speak. But I would say that, what has been important, and you raise a good point, is that in a way, because they were living with me, when they were living with me, the holiday routine was kind of easier because you're kind of giving your kids Jewish life and you're having to think about how am I wanting them to absorb that. Obviously, when they saw their Michigan mother going through a Jewish year and really taking very seriously the learning and the observances, they were absorbing, I think, a kind of prioritization that I hope will stay with them. It's not like they chose that and I didn't continue that same kind of rigor, but I think the kind of conversations we were having and that I was bringing to the table were important, and I was glad that they were part of it. Then they went off to college, and now they're post-college. My daughter just went to grad school. So it's really kind of up to them. And I realized it's also up to me. In a way, nobody's watching now, and I'm not bestowing these kinds of holidays and lessons and framing around these holidays. And so I've had to sort of do that deep dive. And really the way that I've kept it up is the learning. Like, I feel like for me, it's not that I'm gonna, ever know what you know, ever know what your wife knows, but I do feel like that's part of both the discipline, the joy, and the fact that it never, the windows keep opening is, when there's a book that someone tells me about, or a book that has been there forever that I never read, that has always been on my list, or a class that I can stream online, or attend in person. I started a Machzor class, going to a Machzor class at Hadar last week, which I know is an independent seminary in Manhattan, is just kind of keeping it not just sharp, but alive. The humility of being a learner is also, I think, really what it means to be a Jew. And that's kind of, in a way, more than every single holiday observance, is kind of in the run-up to the holiday, or around the holiday, is continuing to learn.
It actually connects in some level to my entry to this conversation about why a Jewish year, that learning could be another way in. And now you're saying you're turning more toward the learning. And just to follow that, because it's something you and I were speaking about as well, it's just remarkable that some of these people that I had to travel far and wide to find and study with. One person that you quote is Yafa Epstein. And I went to Jerusalem in 2008 with my family, sabbatical, and I studied with her at Pardes. And it was really an amazing thing. And she's an amazing teacher. Or Yitz Greenberg, I went to, like all these people I had to travel far and wide to do. And you were living in a way with, family, friends, and you're able to study with them. But now everyone is able to study with these people. Yes. We are living in a democratization of learning that is phenomenal with online learning. And people are starting to taking advantage of that. And I assume that's what you're seeing as well.
Yes, and I do feel like it can be so daunting, and there can be a sense of, well, I don't know where to begin, and I don't know where to start. And I felt that way too. And I don't want people even to think, I'm so glad you've mentioned that my book is accessible, because I think you learn a lot, but you also laugh, and you also see things that are very relatable. I wanted it not to be pediatric. I don't want to talk down. I wanted someone who actually even was an observant Jew to get something from it. And I say that again with humility, but I had Orthodox people say, I've just been doing this by rote my whole life. All of these holidays, I haven't stopped to think, almost like, well, where did they come from? And what is the grounding? And what are the texts that leads to the liturgy and all of those things? So I wanted it to be full. I wanted it to be rich. But I also wanted to say, I'm stuck too where you are. And there have been plenty of times where I think, I'm never going to understand that. How do I begin? Or I don't know where to begin. I don't know which book to read. I have a bibliography in the back of my book, and as you say, I have these lists of rabbis who I was able to access, who are I sort of curated a group of teachers. But what I would say is, you mentioned Pardes, which is incredible. The Hartman Institute is on fire right now with what they offer, and that's I think, to me, where I get most of my learning is to all of the Hartman stuff. But there's things that ADL offers, there's things that American Jewish Committee offers, and as we also talked about, Yitz Greenberg is now attached to Hadar as sort of a guest faculty, and so he's doing stuff with Hadar, HADAR in New York. All of this is available, and it isn't just available in real time, because I just missed something last week that I'm going to go back and watch, because they're usually offering the recording. So I think the richness of that and the sort of cornucopia of offerings means that you don't have to, in a way, you can be anonymous and show up. I remember how difficult it was for me to just walk into a room and think, I'm going to sound dumb. I don't know the Hebrew. I'm not going to read fast enough. I'm not going to know the reference points. It is very humbling to do Jewish learning sometimes with people who know more. And I know some of these people on this call may feel as I do, that Jews don't want to, feel ignorant. But it's kind of embracing, I think, that the fact that, again, to be a dedicated or engaged Jew is to be a learning one. And I'm sure you're offering things too that all of us can check in and find.
We're offering you and your book. Yes, and we are many other things as well. I'm going to ask two final questions, and so I'm just giving others a chance to start thinking about questions they might want to be offering as well.
Okay.
From, again, at the outset, you referenced your mom, and you talked about being at the Feminist Seder of 1976 and going forward of just a remarkably important moment in Jewish life. I don't know how much you have thoughts about this, but where do you think the next frontiers of feminism are for Judaism?
That's such a good question. And for those who don't know, my mom, Letty Cotton Pogrebin, is one of the co-founders of Ms. Magazine with Gloria Steinem back in 1972. They just actually celebrated, or maybe it was 71, but they just celebrated 50 years. You do the math. I went to that party actually last week. It's kind of amazing how many of the founders are thank goodness, still alive. But they were obviously creating a magazine at a very different time and speaking to women when opportunities were much more limited. And in Judaism, the arc of even just having women leaders, was unheard of in my mother's day. She was a very unusual bat mitzvah for her time. And now my rabbi is Angela Bookdahl, who is not only a woman, but an Asian American, the first Asian American to be ordained. So we are in a new world, thank goodness. And I think that the variety and the diversity is only enriched Jewish life. When I think about the different next frontier, I do think that, first of all, LGBTQ issues are ones that every synagogue has kind of had to not just wake up to, but be a little more expansive and open about. And that's not just women, it's men as well. And I do feel like it's not that every hurdle has kind of been crossed when it comes to women leadership. I still see certain kinds of inequality when it comes to sometimes what women rabbis, let me just put it this way, there are too many panels I'm asked to moderate where the panel is all male. So I feel like we still have a few mountains to climb in terms of not necessarily making it equal, but understanding that there are incredible women voices out there that haven't been heard.
You're reminding me, actually, I just read something in the forward about federations and how that is still a frontier of mainly the large federations, male leadership. And
male leadership.
75% or so of federations on the large levels were all male. And so that's still one area. So this last question is probably totally unfair because it's about being president of Central Synagogue, which is a unique synagogue. It's phenomenal on so many levels, leadership wise, its ability to have been able to be in this moment of the pandemic, just right there when people needed it, because as you said, it was all online in advance. And with the leadership of Peter Rubenstein before, and now Angela Bookdahl, I mean, we've a lot of great leadership for our movement. But I want to ask you, having been president and having seen the inside and trying to struggle with synagogues, what do you think are the challenges for synagogues going forward now? Because there are a lot of challenges of trying to place ourselves. And I'll just preface that even more by saying, I know that Central is trying to anticipate that and trying to create online community and doing a lot of things that actually most synagogues can't do. We're trying ourselves. But where are the danger points or the fracture points that you're worried about?
No, it's a great question. And it's, first of all, very kind of you to give kavod to another synagogue. Not every rabbi does that. Kavod meaning respect and honor. And I'm sure my rabbi would give it right back to you, as she did when I was preparing for this. I think that it was a privilege. It was such an honor to be president of Central. And one of the things I saw up close, and again, this was pre-pandemic, was just how nothing replaces what clergy can do, and I say all clergy, when we are at our highest and our lowest moments. And I don't say that like a Hallmark card. We need you, and we rely on not just your wisdom, but your kind of stewardship through what can be some of the hardest territory. And when I watch, we have 6,000 families, 6,000 members, 2,700 families at Central. There's a lot of need. There's a lot of loss. There's a lot of illness. There's a lot of joy. There are a lot of simchas, and sort of not just keeping up with those, but making people feel like they are being met where they are is the most sacred work there is. There's nothing, no holiday, no observance, no prayer comes close to just what I think clergy do when they sit with someone or celebrate with someone. So that seeing that was in a way I felt like, this will sound like an overstatement, seeing God in action, like that was something that will never leave me. That said, I do think when I think about my kids who are now 23 and 25, when I see how many kind of creative, original, new iterations of Jewish engagement there are, I think it is harder and harder to make the case for paying a lot of money, paying dues, or frankly, a certain rate or fee just to belong to something when you don't have a sense of how it's necessarily going to open your life. If you haven't, or if you've had a sense as a child, but you really sort of skipped it for your young adulthood and then are coming back only once you're kind of under the chuppah and or have a partner, I just feel like there isn't necessarily a clear sense that synagogues are necessary, I will say, for spiritual life for some of our younger family. And I say this for Jews and non-Jews alike. I just did a piece for Tablet Magazine interviewing the non-Jewish spouse of an interfaith marriage. And there's so many of these folks are really living Jewish life. They've chosen not to convert, but they're part of their discussion and agreement with their spouse or partner was to live a Jewish life with their families or their kids or in their marriage. And they embrace Judaism in this way that I almost want to remind a bunch of Jews, this is why they've chosen it, even if they haven't converted. It's because of what, not that it's better, but look at what what they see Judaism offers. So it's not that I think we have to sell this, but I think we have to adjust to the fact that a synagogue in a way has to do what I think you're doing, which is, reach out and bring in some of the other stuff that's going on so that people see that, yes, I need a home, I need a rabbi, I need a cantor or more than one, but I also kind of want to get my Judaism from all over the place. It's not necessarily just going to be at one address.
Well, from your mouth to God's ears, as they say. And actually, Shai, as you start taking us off of Spotlight, and everybody make sure you go to gallery view so you can see each other and start thinking about questions and giving people the chance to unmute. We'll make sure you can at this point too. Just tell us, Abigail, just about your new venture with Minyan, because you were referencing that just now. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. So Tablet Magazine asked me to basically be the kind of moderator, curator of something called the Minyan. And it's once a month, one Jewish lens on Jewish life, one particular lens on Jewish life, not through experts. We love rabbis and we love the professionals in the Jewish world, but we want to hear from just regular Jews, or frankly, in this last case this week, non-Jews, about one perspective on just the reality, the day-to-day real world experience of being Jewish through a particular prism. So the first one was LGBTQ Jews. We gathered, I think, 10 to 12, and it's called the Minyan, so you can find them on Tablet Magazine, or you'll find them with my name. The second one was on Orthodox women. I interviewed Orthodox women, which is quite a spectrum. I look for people of different ages. So it spans from 25 to 85 in terms of who's part of the Minyan. And the third one, which was just ran, I guess on Thursday, it was published, was on the non-Jewish spouse in an interfaith marriage. And the next one, I think, is going to be on Jews who live with a disability, a physical, not a mental disability. So honestly, if someone has someone who who might be interesting for me to talk to, I hope you will send them my way, because it's really helpful to hear from people all over the country. And that's going to be the next prism.
I'm sure we could actually help you on that, but
That would be great.
Invite folks here. To anybody just want to raise your hands, and I'll just mention that my colleagues are all in the square that says Rabbi Esther Adler. That's in our boardroom. We have some people here in person who are watching together, and so I'll invite Rabbi Adler to let us know if we do have a hand. So go ahead and unmute there.
I just want to say hi to the gang watching together.
Those were just people saying hello.
Wonderful, but now you're on the spot. Anybody there?
There's got to be a question.
Michael Cooney has been taking copious notes. Michael, do you have a question? She's glaring at me.
So Abigail, you talked about Heshbon Hanefesh, and I know it's a personal question, but I'm just wondering what your practice is during Elul beyond the shofar in terms of this accounting of the soul.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning it. Heshbon Hanefesh, for people who didn't hear, is accounting of the soul. One of the things that was suggested to me was to take one trait a day and just probe it very personally. when I did it the first time, for those who've read the book, you know this, it was suggested that you pick a Hevruta, a study partner, and basically a friend, someone to do this with. And I found online, it doesn't exist anymore, I don't think, this particular list, but it's in my book and I'm sure it's other places, a list of 40 traits. And I took one trait a day and just reflected on it for myself and tried to be as honest as I could in just writing, whether it was a paragraph or a page, on just my sort of reckoning with that aspect of myself. It was kind of a unpacking of atonement in a more granular way. So, one day would be anger, another day would be envy, another day would be patience or impatience in my case. And so what I've done this year is gone back to the first time I did it and taken a look at what I wrote down with my friend, Catherine. She wrote hers, and we would exchange at the end of each day on that one trait. And this year I'm looking back each day on what I wrote then and how far I've come or how much I failed to improve. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Mike.
This format is fascinating. Go ahead.
Steve Levin has a hand up over here.
So
Okay. So Dave Wark, then Steve.
Excellent. I didn't see that, Dave.
No, sorry, it was a mistake.
Steve is very observant. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, I a couple of questions come to mind, especially regarding your last comment about looking at individual traits one at a time. One of the wonderful new practices that Rabbi Spilker has introduced to our congregation in the past, about 10 years, maybe not quite that many, is a practice called Musar. And I'm just wondering if you are at all familiar with it and how you see that fitting into your Jewish observance, regardless of the calendar.
It's a great question. And I think Musar is incredible. I'm so glad to hear that Rabbi Spilker has led you into that territory, or you have yourself. I will admit that I started a Musar class. I mean, I started, meaning joined. I was not leading it. I joined it at Central while I was president and found that it was just, I was not meeting the requirements. It was demanding in a wonderful way that while I was president, it just, the band didn't have the bandwidth and felt like I was shortchanging it. And partly because we had Musar groups, which you may have done as well. And I wasn't really able to show up, and that felt wrong to me. So you are actually mentioning something that reminds me, I have to get back to it because I never finished it. I did read the book, and maybe Adam or someone can remind me of the book that we were using as kind of a study guide through it. So
Everyday
I want to
Holiness.
return to it. Yes, Everyday Holiness. Thank you. But you've reminded me in a good way that I am guilty of not returning to my Musar exploration and learning. But I think it's wonderful. And you're so right to raise it because the thing about Elul, as you know, is that there really is no blueprint for how to market and celebrate it. And all the rabbis and scholars, when I was trying to understand it, were kind of saying you're on your own. You can make your own practice, but there is no actual one thing that anyone does. And I went to Park Avenue Synagogue for Slichot, but then which is the Saturday before Rosh Hashanah begins. But then I also went up to the Hadar service, which is a completely different animal. You would have thought maybe this is a kind of an entirely different holiday. Some of the poetry that is part of this holiday, Slichot, was similar, but otherwise it's another example of just Elul is really expressed very differently. There is no one way. So thank you for mentioning Musar is great.
And it's a very Musar answer, to be totally upfront. And Rabbi Yada reminded us that she is leading an open first entry-level everyday holiness Musar VAD, which means groups, this year. So it's a great time to start again. I'll just mention, Abigail, that while your rabbis were helping us think about small groups and how to set that up at Mount Zion, I was able to give them curriculum for their Musar groups that they were doing at Central.
Oh, great.
We were able to exchange.
Wonderful.
It was really important moment. I want to ask, you have this great quote by Rabbi Irwin Kula, who talks about what do we hire a holiday to do for us? What do we hire? Meaning that every holiday needs to have something that it's for us. And then in the specific realm of the April holidays, the Nisan holidays of the Yoms, Yom HaShoah, Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut. You also had this wonderful insight, I can't remember, Chaim Seiler Feller, who talks about no holiday is going to exist if there's nothing at the table, if there's not a meal associated with the holiday, which is the challenge of those three holidays. So any other insights about specifically those three, because those are the new ones that are newer on the calendar. And we added for the first time since Purim, we have Hanukkah, Purim, and then all of a sudden we add three to the calendar. Any more insights?
Yeah.
Because it's amazing. Go ahead.
My biggest takeaway is that they're not working. I mean, that's really, and that's not me saying it. That was, so many people saying these holidays are just not working. It doesn't mean that people aren't doing them at all. It just means that they are not, again, in the top 10 for many American Jews. Now, partly some are that particularly Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut are Israel focused and connected. But I would say that a lot of American Jews are Israel connected, and they just either don't know what to do on the holiday, they don't know where to go. So part of it is that we don't have the ritual. And as Chaim Seidler-Feller said, like, we're not so good doing a holiday, keeping a holiday without food involved. And I think he's joking, but it's also kind of true. There's nothing that gathers us around the table. As you know, there are some controversial suggestions about Yom HaShoah, about essentially having a new kind of Seder. And the Hartman Institute has created a really powerful, essentially a Haggadah to kind of mark this, unspeakable history that we have. But what's so interesting, and I hope people will read this part of the book, so I'm glad you mentioned it, is just where these holidays came from and who suggested them, and how there was sometimes argument about where to place them, because in some ways it's arbitrary. Where do you put a holiday that marks Yom HaShoah? How do you, and is it even an offense, anathema, to think about the fact that one day can mark this seismic, I don't have to, there's no words for that chapter in Jewish history. And so I just hope you'll take a look, some who haven't, and I know we don't have time now to look at just where some of the fighting was, even in the Knesset, about where to put Yom HaShoah. But I would just say that the discipline of having to kind of investigate those holidays and then mark them was absolutely wonderful. And I'm so glad that they're there, even as difficult as particularly Yom HaShoah and Yom HaZikaron are.
I'll just offer my 2 cents on this too, that I feel that some of the trying to come up with a Seder for these holidays feels forced, and I'm not sure that's going to work either. I appreciate why the sentiment is there, but maybe they really are meant to be communal gatherings, and without a meal even necessarily, and not at a home observance. I worry in our own community, Yom HaShoah was always such a powerful thing that from Minneapolis and St. Paul, Twin Cities wide, we would gather 1,000 people every year.
Wow.
And it was so ensconced in our community's history. And now with COVID, and now with fewer and fewer survivors, I don't know if that's going to continue. And so I actually, when I was reading your chapter, got really scared for that.
Yeah.
Joe Constant has a question.
Please.
Yeah, so this actually comes up. I was thinking of it before you said this, but it's really tied together. I was going to ask you, of the whole year of holidays, is there one that you think it's time we let go of?
Oh.
And now I'm going to ask you that in the context that if I think about how we grew up as Americans, we all celebrated Lincoln and Washington's birthdays. And then we realized, well, we're going to merge them together into President's Day, and we made room to celebrate Martin Luther King. We all celebrated Columbus Day, and many of us are now celebrating Indigenous peoples. It may be there's a capacity beyond which they can't all have that much meaning. And are there some that we need to let fade to enable us to invest the energy in the new ones we might need?
It's such a great question. I didn't even know that about the presidents combining So you've just taught me something that I shouldn't have maybe admitted. I think though, it feels a little like sacrilege for me to suggest that, but what I would say that I observed, and I'm sure we all have, is something like Shmini Atzeret, which is the end of Sukkot, is powerful in its teaching, but there's, the fact that Sukkot is one thing, and I think it's beautiful and it's wonderful, but it's long, coming right out of the holidays, which are sort of intense, the high holidays. And then to have to do Hoshana Rabbah, which I did not know, didn't understand until I did this book, and Shmini Atzeret, it just felt to me like it's almost like we're just sort of holiday piling at that point. And that it's hard to kind of really, have it be as meaningful as I think maybe it could have been if there were just like a few less. But that said, what I do see is that there is something about the marathon aspect. The clown car, like you open the door and there's 15 holidays all at once. And having to have gone through it when I did, that even though I wouldn't do it again in that same intense way, the intensity is part of the point, and the discomfort is kind of part of what you experience and learn. So I don't mean to squirm out of it, but I think I'd be hard pressed to say this is what should go. I definitely have the things I like and don't like. I like more and like less, not don't like at all, but maybe I'll keep those to myself.
You even came back to the Shmini Atzeret actually in your conclusion too, which I appreciate about that just one more day, and it's quiet day. Which is such a beautiful thing if you can appreciate it. But I hear even from a lot of my conservative colleagues that they're ready to drop the second day observances of holidays. As people know here, I'm pretty militant about, I don't believe in it. I think if you can observe one day, that should be enough, and we shouldn't try to force people to do more than it's even in the expectation because of an accident of the calendar. And I'm hearing that. I wonder if that contraction will happen. But with Shmini Atzeret specifically, as you described well, they had a second day of nothing, so what do you do a second day of nothing? And so they turned it into Simchat Torah, which people love. So that's not going to be rejected anytime soon.
No, it's true. And the second Seder got sort of complicated during the pandemic because it was on Zoom. My family was on Zoom, 40 of us on Zoom, and I actually led it. And I wasn't going to do that 2 nights in a row. And that is also a calendar-driven reason why we do too, obviously in the diaspora. So I just, I'm not going to again ever say out loud, and certainly not on a taped Zoom, that we should drop the second night of Seder. I grew up with 2, and it's just part of my DNA. But sometimes I can sense some people saying, "Oh my God, we're doing this all again," and the pressure to make it kind of lively and different is gives me a lot of tsuris every year. Not to mention I'm serving similar food.
Maybe as a segue from the, would there be anything that could be dropped from the calendar? I can't believe no one else has asked. I was giving people a chance to ask this about the fasting, which you described so well, not 1, not 2, but 6 fasts during the year. And you describe all of them and trying to find some meaning and finding some insights on each one. But which one surprised you the most as something that was really?
I think, the idea that on Tammuz, that it is basically we're fasting for the siege of the temple, that 4 out of the 6 are about a temple that doesn't exist anymore, is challenging to me, because our Judaism isn't oriented towards this building in this place. But that the idea of Tammuz, of it being like almost the penultimate kind of moment before the end. And the teaching was from Alana Stein-Hain, who's had Hartman, whom I'm sure you know is just an extraordinary teacher. And she said, how many times have we seen people who know that an end is inevitable? They know that they're dying. They know they're not going to ultimately make it through whatever struggle they're in, but they have to walk the walk anyway. They have to get there. And there's beauty in that. And there's obviously incredible difficulty in that, but sacredness in that. And just the frame of that fast for me, and particularly because I had a friend who was dying at a very young age and leaving 2 young children, and watching our conversations were that I'm speaking to someone who knew she was not going to live to another year, had just great, it was indelible, and it will stay with me.
That's a very personal way of connecting to it. And I think that's really powerful. And there's also the communal side of attaching to it, where you're looking for the warning signs in society. As you said, that day in Tammuz, the 17th day, it's the siege of Jerusalem. So it's before the destruction, which means like pay attention to the 30s in Germany, or what's going on right now, and how to pay attention. And what gave me a lot of chills actually reading your book was all the descriptions of anti-Semitism, and to think how worse it is now, even when you were writing it. And just, that's a really challenging thing. But I don't want to end on that note. So I'm going to give you a chance to just think about anything else that maybe you would like to just share with our community, anything else about the holiday.
Yeah, I guess I would just say, and I so appreciate this time and that all of you showed up. And I wish I could give you, some grappa from Italy, but next time I'll bring it when we're all together, hopefully in person. I would just say that I think if I was going to distill what I took away from all of these holidays, from this architecture of our tradition and our inheritance, it is not about necessarily what you feel, and it is asking us, what are you doing? And you mentioned the brokenness we are seeing so much now, as we have, but particularly I think the divisiveness of our country today, and the need and the pain. And it sometimes is across the world, and it's sometimes next door, and it's sometimes in some, in our own families. I feel like these holidays, it maybe sounds cliche to talk about this as a Jewish teaching, but sometimes we talk about Jewish values, Jewish ethics, and it sort of blurs together, and we don't actually unpack what those words require of us. And these holidays, almost to a holiday, said, yes, you should celebrate, or yes, you should mourn, but more than anything, pay attention. Pay attention to who might need you, and where you might actually make some small difference to alleviate someone else's suffering or difficulty. And that isn't easy, but I feel like if that's kind of what our holidays ask of us, Dayenu, that's what we should carry. It's not about guilt, it's about responsibility, and that we should absolutely enjoy, our matzo ball soup, but we know that at that Seder, we are actually supposed to pay attention to who is the stranger right now. And in every one of those fasts, and I believe me, I did not like not eating, but as we approach this, one of the longest of the two, or one of the two longest fasts in our tradition, is when we're uncomfortable, is to think about who is uncomfortable, and not just hungry. There's too many who are, but who is in a place of Mitzrayim, who is in a place of narrowness and difficulty, and what could I possibly do to kind of soften that experience for someone else.
Such an important way to end, to think about paying attention and think about our responsibility to others. And I am so grateful on behalf of our community that you are joining us. Highly recommend to everybody to use this book as a touch point through the year, so that you can start paying attention more and more to each of these holidays and insights that you might not have thought about before.